We don't have a ton of support for independent magazine publishers to get started, and it's something that I really want to see. So the idea of a magazine incubator, I want to incubate and mentor and support startup publishing projects. I want to give platforms to stories that aren't being told in our commercial media, and I want to give money to writers and photographers and illustrators who are doing the work to platform those stories. That's my dream right now, and it'll take me some time to figure out how to get there.
Hello and welcome to Creativity for Sale podcast, a show to help you start and grow your life-changing creative career and business. My name is Radim Malinic and creativity changed my life. You see, I believe creativity can change your life too. I even wrote a book about it and it inspired this podcast. I've set out to interview the world's most brilliant creatives, designers, writers, musicians, makers and marketeers about their life-changing experiences with creativity. If you ever wanted to know how people go from their humble beginnings to the pinnacle of their success, our conversation should provide you with an intimate look into triumphs, challenges and untold stories behind their creative endeavors. We also discuss the highs and lows of creative careers and creative life. So, thank you for joining me on this exploration of passion, creativity, innovation and the boundless potential within us all. Let creativity change your life. Are you ready? My guest today is an award-winning editorial designer based in Toronto. For over a decade, she's been art directing and designing magazines, and not too long ago, she took her love of magazines to another level. She opened a brick-and-mortar retail store with a mandate to celebrate the people and projects keeping print alive. She's also the current president of the Association of Registered Graphic Designers, RGD, where she advocates for the value of design. It's my pleasure to introduce Nicola Hamilton. Hi Nicola, it's my great pleasure to have you on the show. How are you doing today?
I am doing so well today. Thanks for asking.
Thank you. Thank you for coming on. Normally I always go on a record to say, this is my friend and we've met here, we've met there, but you and I haven't met. We haven't met in person just yet, even though we were a few meters away at the last event in Design Thinkers in Toronto. So I jumped at the opportunity to actually speak to you a bit more properly, and I just want to know everything about what you do. So for those who don't know you, would you like to introduce yourself for us?
Sure. So my name's Nicola Hamilton, and I'm an editorial designer based in Toronto, Canada. I work on publications like Best Health, Serviette Magazine, which is an independent food title, and a handful of others. I'm also the president of RGD, which is the Association of Registered Graphic Designers here in Canada. We host a conference twice a year called Design Thinkers that you spoke at not long ago. And then I also own a magazine store in Toronto called Issues Magazine Shop. So we exist to support the people and projects keeping print alive.
I want to know, how do you go from your beginnings into editorial design? We have one superpower in common, and that's obsession about editorial and print. Because I'm obsessive about books, I'm obsessive about layouts and getting the physical product in front of people, into their hands and having them to own it. We'll go into the editorial before we start talking about magazine show. But what's your background? What was your story?
Yeah, so growing up, I think I was an artistic kid, but I was also pretty good in your traditional subjects as well. And to be honest, I don't have a moment where I realized that graphic design was a thing I could go into. It was a path that seemed really natural for me. I started my sort of post-secondary education in fine arts and cultural studies because I was not accepted into a graphic design program right out of high school. So I took an alternative acceptance to study fine art. I spent a year doing that before transferring into a graphic design program. The editorial piece makes more sense in hindsight. My mom is a photographer, an equestrian photographer, a very specific niche. She photographs horses. So her livelihood was always selling photos to magazines. And her office, which was just outside of my bedroom growing up, was just littered with magazine covers that she had shot and mounted. And that's not something that made sense until someone pointed it out to me recently. But I was more aware of editorial design and magazines in design school. I remember taking editorial design, my very first editorial one class, and just falling in love. It was the combination of illustration and photography with typography, and then just storytelling, right? Those rabbit holes that we can dive into, the things we can learn while researching a project that I love so much. So I turned every single one of my graduating portfolio projects into a magazine project, an editorial project in some way, shape, or form. So if it was a branding project, I was branding a magazine or a book publisher. If it was a web project, I was making an editorial website. So much so that some of my past profs still poke fun at me for it.
Wow. Look where you are now. It's amazing that you said actually that your mother was actually an equestrian photographer. I'm married to an equestrian fanatic. So yeah, I am very much aware of what your mom could have been doing because I'm around that world quite a lot. And your journey kind of reminds me similar to what I would attest to as a child and a teenager. Like you don't really know that you can be a graphic designer. You know, the magazine covers and that kind of stuff. You get hints and clues and there's record covers, but it doesn't always feel like, is this what I can be doing? I'm fascinated that you found this editorial passion quite early on because sometimes we get lost and we try to find our real passion and obsession. And the magazines, did you have with the equestrian magazines, was there a stack of magazines that you always sort of admired as a child, or was it sort of revelation around your mid to late teens that you realize, oh, I want to do editorial?
So I think that, like many teenagers, magazines were definitely a way into culture. So I grew up in a really small town outside of Toronto with not a lot of access to culture. So magazines were definitely my way into culture. And fascinatingly, the timing's really funny. One of the magazines that made the biggest impression on me growing up was actually Nylon magazine, which is an American fashion title, but an alternative fashion title with deep roots in music. And they went away, and I actually just picked up their relaunch issue. They're back in print just this month. And that one of the first times I remember as a young person stumbling on a magazine as a sort of doorway into a different realm, a different world, culture and style and fashion that I maybe didn't know existed, that I found way more interesting than what was available to me in the tiny rural town I grew up in.
So in your small town, how did you even know about the magazine? Was there like a sort of news agent where you go and there's all the magazines, or is it like a mail order? Because how long ago were you talking about this? Sorry. Being curious about it's just because sometimes you don't know what you don't know. Like you have to sometimes go and find these things. Like the world wasn't as connected back then. So how did you get access to Nylon and similar magazines?
Again, I think a lot of that credit goes to my mom, right? She was going to the newsstand, which was a sort of 40-minute drive from where I grew up. She was going to the newsstand to pick up the titles that she was published in. And so we're at the bookstore wandering around as children as she's doing that. And I'm flicking through other things. And she would happily buy us a book or a magazine while we were there.
That's amazing. I like it. I like it. The equestrian section. Yeah, I don't think there was always a fight around the magazines because you all had each other's section quite clear, signposted.
But isn't it funny how that's not a connection I've ever made until you've asked me that question? So that sort of piece of your career doesn't make sense until you're looking back at it afterwards. It's only recently that I've made the connection between my mom's work and my access to magazines.
Yeah, I think as a proud dad to young children, you know, what happens in their lives. But we always say we leave these breadcrumbs that they can pick up and build together. And my children are already skilled with Apple pencils and Wacom tablets and painting in frescoes and that kind of stuff. It's a different world, right? Like to us, it'd be like a Disneyland. Like, what do you mean this kind of stuff exists? But I think sometimes we don't even know what our influences are until we really look into how we are formed, because we feel like we come to our sort of teenagers as a clean slate, totally oblivious to our childhood traumas and experiences, that kind of stuff. And then go, yeah, of course, I'm open to anything, only to know that we really follow the things that have been shaping us for years and years. Dedication to actually 40-minute drive to a magazine store, like a newsstand, that's, I can't imagine that. I always grew up in the cities, but sometimes where I grew up in Czech Republic, you have to actually put a mail order. That's what I was asking. You have to put a mail order for something really good, CDs or albums. You need to know what you really wanted. And that was an interesting part, because now I'm in a hyper-connected world and you're one click away from having something delivered within a week or something. So we're making a connection with magazines. And it's good to know that Nylon is actually back in print. So you're in the graphic design course and you're making everything editorial, branding magazines, branding all of this and that. Where does it take you next? Where do you go next with your obsession for editorial?
So I finished design school in 2011, and in April of 2011, we finished up our semester in the spring. And we had an internship component. We were required to do a 4-week internship to complete our studies. And I was lucky enough to do my internship at a studio here in Toronto called Underline Studio. And at the time, they were just 5 people and they did a ton of editorial work, but they had 1 foot in editorial land and 1 foot in boutique studio. And so that seemed like a really interesting place for me to test out whether or not I really wanted to do this magazine thing or not. And the magazine world still felt really abstract to me. It's quite opaque. Trying to figure out how to gain access into the publishing landscape is quite hard. I think especially not coming from a journalism program that might have had deeper ties to the publishers here in Canada or across North America. So I do my internship at Underline, which is amazing. And I get to work on a magazine from beginning to end. And I adore it. I know absolutely that I adore it. I finished that internship and I still don't quite know how to get a foot in the door in magazine land. So I traipsed around the city with a portfolio. I think I was one of the last graduating years to actually have a physical portfolio that you're lugging around, this 11 by 17 brown leather thing I'm carrying around with me, showing people, having conversation. I always tell students about this sort of time in my life. I was so much more focused on just gaining knowledge and making friends than I was about finding work. And I think that proved really beneficial down the line. I travel for a little bit in that summer. I come back, I send a bunch of emails to folks I've met saying, hey, I'm open to freelance or to support your studio, or I'm looking for a junior designer position. One of the internships that I had applied for but not gotten at a slightly larger studio here in Toronto called Concrete, it turns out one of their interns had backed out of the position that was coming up. And so they offered that to me. I took that. And that was a really clear indicator that magazines were the thing I really wanted to do because I wasn't doing any of them and I missed it. I finished that internship in the fall. And again, I'm lugging my portfolio around. My moment, the moment I finally made it in magazine land was meeting Vanessa Wise, who was the founding creative director of a publication based here in Toronto called The Grid. And it was an alternative city weekly for free in a magazine or a newspaper box on the street. It was printed on newsprint, but it was designed like a magazine. It had just launched that year, brand new, and doing really, really interesting things in both the design space and the editorial space. And it was catered to people who were exactly me. So people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s living in the city. And I met Vanessa and we had this wonderful conversation. I remember it being maybe the longest portfolio review interview I've ever done. We chatted forever. We swapped sort of favorite magazines. She told me lots of stories from her time working in magazines, both here in Canada and in Australia, where she's from. And she emailed me a couple of days later and said, hey, we have someone going on vacation for 2 weeks. Do you want to come in and support the team? I said, yes, absolutely. Looking back on it, I don't think I asked about pay or invoicing or hours. I think I just said yes. And I joined The Grid for 2 weeks to help them put out 2 issues. And that was amazing. And then the staffer came back from their vacation. And that was it for me until a little while later. Vanessa emailed and asked me to meet her for breakfast and offered me a position there. And so I spent just over 3 years at The Grid as a designer. That publication was a weekly. So you want to talk about sort of boot camp in making magazines. We put out an issue every single week.
I've got so many questions from what you just said. But the first one is, where is that leather portfolio right now? Have you still got it?
I do. I just moved. I actually just moved it to the basement of the shop. So it's in the basement of issues in a box full of old portfolio things.
Because it's one of those things that you can't just get rid of. It's, I don't know, yours sounds quite nice, but I had a really ugly one and I just like, you know what, I don't really want it, but I can't get rid of it because it's like, I still have the original sleeves as a commercial illustrator and advertising. It was only about 6 double-sided sleeves or maybe 7 double-sided sleeves, but it's like the same pieces that were there in 2012 or actually not even now, 2007. Same pieces of work are still there. Is your work still the same in the portfolio or have you changed it?
No, I don't think I've touched it since I got that job at The Grid in 2011. My favorite part about the plastic sleeves that I don't think folks who are lucky enough to not have to lug these portfolio cases around. Do you remember Windexing, like cleaning the plastic so it didn't have fingerprints on it? Is that something you did?
My illustration was quite intricate, so like whatever you would do, it would just enhance the pictures. But yeah, I think we are from different generation. Like it was kind of like you could even spot the competition. Like if for example, you went for a job interview, and there would be people come in with portfolio cases. I was like, who's that? What do they know? Because today, anyone works in a building, they could be anyone. It could be the CEO, the founder, or an intern, because we all look the same now. No one's got a case. So what was the folio at that time that you had that you were showing around? And you mentioned that sort of the boot camp, right? The element of actually putting magazine out every week, because editorial design can be really a creative endurance. Like, it's, especially with magazines, that every page could be different. Like, there's, even though we work with templates and content and editors and writers, it's a lot of content. It's a lot of content to put together, because I was always in awe, especially as a young designer, to see newspapers in the UK that got 80 pages in a day. I'm like, how on earth are you putting this together? Because when you're a junior designer, you're like, I've just designed a poster. It's taking me 3 days. How are these people doing it? So from the work that was in your folio that got you the job, what was it like to go into this environment that obviously you had a few steps in, but to actually be thrown into the deep end and actually work with the team and produce something as complex as a magazine once a week?
I still remember seeing my name in print after that first week. I remember my childhood best friend got up really early the day the magazine came out and sent me a photo of my name in the masthead. And that was really exciting. That's validating in a way. I think magazine designers are some of the few designers that get credit in public that way. I remember it being terrifying. The work I was given was uber templated work, and that was reassuring, right? It's nice as a junior to be like, yeah, I know how to typeset this. I did not know how to typeset that. Vanessa then taught me how to typeset that. You learn a lot. And I think the thing about the grid, I sometimes joke that job ruined all jobs after that, because it was such an incredible place to work. We were so connected to the city, to Toronto, to the scene, to what was happening here. We were doing something exciting. Everybody was in a position that was just above their experience level. So everyone was working that little bit harder. And we were doing something that sort of had the design landscape, the design community, that had the editorial community, the journalism community, and just generally folks in Toronto excited. And that was really cool. Collaborative environment. I think that was something that I really dug as a junior designer starting out. And just those 2 weeks, I got to see how photos are assigned, how illustrations are assigned, how photos are chosen, how illustrators are given feedback, how we figure out the order of the stories, and then how a layout goes through all of its sort of rounds of checking. And every magazine has different processes for those things. But the grid was a really well-run ship in that way because it came out so frequently. It needed to be. And the team had already put in all of these incredible processes to make it as smooth as it could be.
Did you find yourself going to bed and just your head buzzing with all the information that you were taking in every day? Because there's nothing more exciting than having this overload of information in daily. Because like you on the ship, everyone's doing their thing. And then you go home and go, whoa, what just happened? And we go again tomorrow. How was it? Must have been exciting.
It was really exciting. I think I've gotten used to that. That doesn't go away when you're making a magazine. So that sort of production day, production week sort of energy and excitement of like the pace at which you're moving, the amount of information that you're taking in, the number of decisions that you're making. I think that sort of buzziness sticks around. I definitely finish a day like that and it takes a few hours to come down. So even if you've been at your desk really late, you're there until well past your bedtime, I still have to go home and do something to decompress, watch some bad TV, zone out for a bit, because it does put you on an energetic high for sure.
It sounds like that you got your first position being open to what you can learn, because sometimes we find ourselves as novice designers, we try to prove our worth and we are slightly anxious and now we've got our insecurity. So we try to sort of put our other persona forward and go like, yeah, I've got a solution, I can do this and I can do that. And we are not necessarily too helpful because we haven't been around the block even once, but be like, you know what, I'm going to do this. I'm going to show you. But it sounds like that you kind of got the entry point from a right angle, that you got to see the magazine and hustling and being busy and being a well-oiled machine. So it sounds, I don't know, we're not stepping on anyone's toes, we're actually part of a collaborative process.
There were definitely moments. I don't think any of us come out of school and enter the industry without some of those moments where we say more than we should, or we step on someone's toes because we don't quite understand the politics of a workplace, right? So there's absolutely moments where I was that person.
I'm slightly reassuring because it sounded like you didn't at first. I'm thinking, you've done well. Because I think if there's one sort of point on trying to getting my written work and in a podcast and whenever I speak with people, like everyone makes a mistake. Like we find in our feed at all the time, regardless of the age, there's still another mistake to be made. That's, yeah, I'm really glad because we are all human.
I think that Magazine Land also has this amazing way of making you a little less scared of the mistakes because there's always another issue. And I think working on something that came out as frequently as the grid, working on something weekly, there was no way we were ever going to be able to put out a perfect product because we were doing it so quickly. That entire magazine came together in 4 days. It was designed in a day and a half each week. So there was no way. There was no way there wouldn't be a mistake. And the sort of collective outlook on that was, that's okay. There'll be another issue. It's okay. It's not a big deal. We'll get past it and we'll do better next week. And so starting my career with that mentality, I think was really helpful.
That sounds really good. We've got similar backgrounds. So I work as a designer for a printing company and I get to see my mistakes almost daily. You know, like you make something like, okay, we need to make different color splits or no, this is, don't use a light font on the ridge black and that kind of stuff. So with your position, so you started as a junior and then how far did you go in the company? And obviously, I'm asking more from a point of experience, right? Obviously, because you've been learning through going through the ranks. So how did you go through the magazine and where did you end up on the other end?
Art director, which was really only one position jump. So our team at the time was the founding creative director, Vanessa Wise. There was an associate art director position that was held by a wonderful designer named Adam Holowa until I took that position left. And then I was the designer and eventually Leandra Cianci replaced me as the designer. Collectively moved up to be second in command, but there were only 3 of us. So it was a small team.
During that time, obviously, it sounds like obviously the magazine was developing in a certain style, but how much of a magpie issue have you get being a magazine designer and really seeing other magazines doing their thing? And how do you stay true to the editorial style? Because it's quite easy to be dazzled by other things. If we see it in design all the time, especially with like 3D trends and typographical trends, and how conservative sometimes you have to find yourself with your past work and your current work. How tempting is it to be tempted, and how do you stay not tempted, if that makes sense?
I think it's a fine balance with magazines. And the best magazines are a reflection of the moment in time in which they're published. So there is a certain level of trendiness that I think is okay. I think following trends in that way makes sense. Sometimes I think you still want to be true to the overall identity of the publication. So that's the balance, right? How much do I need to keep templated and consistent issue to issue so that this continues to look like the magazine that your readership expects or is familiar with, versus how much of this can I blow up and do something unique to the story, do something that's trendy to try, gives me space to experiment. I think that's a real balance that you're trying to strike all the time. But you do have the benefit of being able to chase trends occasionally or to experiment with things because they are meant to be a reflection of that specific moment.
You hit on the point about going around the city with your folio and making connections. And I think there's one of the superpowers in our industry that as it can be the most amazing creative, but if you don't really know people, it's really hard to get doors open. And yeah, I'm all about meaningful connections, like heralding about go and meet people, be out there, send email every day to someone, like compliment on their work, get to be known, because it's the human aspect, because we are ultimately creating work for other human beings. And sometimes as introverted as someone can be, if they say they are, you still need that connection to actually invoke a feeling in someone with your work. You were doing this work with magazines and now you've got a magazine shop. Let's go to the magazine shop next. I'm gutted. I haven't been there last time I was in Toronto. I need to fix it next time I come, because it's not only just a sort of standard magazine, but it's touted as the magazine for hard to find publications and for people who keep magazines in print. And I've got so many questions because being an independent publisher, it feels sometimes like it's the most amazing feeling to be taken on the world of regular, big boys and girls with the publishing houses, and then having these battles and boulders carrying up the hill going, this is sometimes really hard, but it's the most rewarding thing. When did you open your shop and why?
I opened issues in July of 2022. So we're nearing our 2nd birthday. So we're still a toddler. We're still finding our feet. I opened the store because I wished it would exist. So for years, I would joke to other magazine friends, I would mention, I wish something like Meg Culture or Casa or Under the Cover existed here in Toronto. I don't understand why it doesn't exist here in Toronto. We're as creative of a city as New York and London. Why don't we have this? And I think like a lot of people during the pandemic, I started to take stock of what I was doing professionally and what I wanted to do more of or what I wanted to see exist in the world. And supporting this magazine industry was really important to me. So I've been a part of the industry for 10 years at that point. The industry in Canada is tough. We are a geographically giant country who often isn't taken as seriously internationally as our neighbors to the south in the United States are taken. And I started to see a lot of my colleagues just get a little bit resentful about the industry or dismissive or sad. And I started to think about ways that I might be able to inject some energy into it, because I do fundamentally think that working in magazines is such an incredible privilege. We get to spend time thinking about things that not everyone else gets to think about. We have access to such incredible artists and thinkers and researchers and celebrity too, that shiny thing that makes the glossies work. And it's really cool. We get to do this thing that's really cool. So I started thinking about what our sort of community needed. And a retail space, a clubhouse, felt like something that I might be able to figure out. And I sent an email to your note about community and about our network being so important. A few years ago, I was lucky enough to meet Jeremy Leslie, who's the founder of Meg Culture and has been documenting the independent magazine landscape worldwide for the last decade plus, maybe nearing, I don't know how long Meg Culture has been around, actually. That's something I should check. But Jeremy, as a blog, was documenting as a writer and publishing books himself about the independent landscape. And Meg Culture is a resource that I used a lot early in my career to do all of that sort of trend seeking and looking at what my colleagues in other parts of the world were doing and experimenting with. And Jeremy opened the Meg Culture store, I think 8 years ago now in London. And I'd been lucky enough to meet Jeremy when he was here speaking at Design Thinkers a bunch of years before that. We'd continued a sort of online friendship. And I sent Jeremy a message and said, hey, I think I want to explore this. Is there any world in which you could answer some nosy questions? And he emailed back immediately. And within a week, we'd gotten on a Zoom call. And he was just so forthcoming with his knowledge and the information he'd gathered over the years. And so issues wouldn't exist without him. But it was that community piece, right? It was that like who you know and who you can ask for help.
I think sounds like a lot of us had a time to rethink what we do in COVID. And we've seen some success stories. We've seen people try to pursue things that didn't go as well. But you said one thing which is important, which is, I wish it existed, which is one of the things that I think is just one of the biggest drives. I think it goes with the obsession. I wish this existed and I'm going to make it happen. It's like ingredients, of an equation, because I like, from what I've seen, mostly from what I see online and from all of the posts, that it all adds up your personality, your interest, and things that you do. So it's a community space. You do portfolio reviews and all of these things that just go beyond the thing. And there's a big chat about how to save the high street in the UK, like how to do it. And obviously you need to rethink, like everything changes. Like what worked 10 years ago doesn't work now. And what works today is not going to work in 10 years, if that makes sense. But we need to bring people together for other reasons than just spending money, like, hey, by the way, come to the store and buy another 15 white t-shirt or whatever, like what we already have 15 of them. So it's that element of bringing people together is what makes things like your store actually works. It's incredible, because I think as an environment for a magazine designer, obviously, it's not as reclusive and isolated position as a freelance illustrator who just takes on the world and hopes to find some friends sometimes. It's not as sad as I'm not trying to insinuate, but it sounds like you're absolutely right in the middle of the right sort of community, and you're doing the best thing for it.
I think it was one of the things that really made me want to do this. And one of the reasons I think I wanted Issues to exist. And you're right, it was totally a vanity project to begin with. It was a selfish endeavor in that I wanted easier access to a lot of these titles. I wanted reasons to gather with other sort of magazine obsessives. It's been important to me from the very beginning that include all of the facets of magazine making. So that's your writers, that's your editors, that's your publishers, but that's also your designers and your illustrators and your photographers. And I think one of the things that's also been really important to me from the beginning is the sort of information sharing, right? Because so many of us do work alone in silos, and inherently designing, photography, illustration, as much as there are collaborative parts, it all starts from a really solitary place. So being able to bring people together to share information, to share their learnings. So many independent publishers are not trained in publishing or design or writing. So for them to be able to share some of the ways that they're thinking about this business, ways that differ from the way this business has been operating for the last 50 years, is really important.
I think it's when you don't know what you don't know, that's when the magic really happens. Like, you don't really want to know everything that comes with what you're taking on, because it might even stop you in your tracks. If you know everything about design career, would you really do it? Because if you know too much, you might not really want to do it. So I think just like being slightly oblivious and naive, I think that's what gets us in this position. Or like, you know what, I'm going to do all of these things. And then, oh, I need to do all of this as well. Oh, okay. How do you have time to read magazines? Do you actually have time to go through them?
I try and make time. Right now, I feel like I'm only making time for the things that I need to. The last magazine I actually sat down and read was a preparation for an event we have here at the shop. I would say I have less time than I used to read them, but I have more opportunities to engage with them here in the shop. So I get to flip through a lot more than I used to be able to flip through, because I used to have to buy it and ship it from Europe and pay a lot of money to get access to them, where here there's so many more.
For those who would love to be stocked in stores like yours, what is the best way to do it? Because it sometimes feels like, especially in the past, it felt like a sort of gate-kept industry. Like, how do you get into the newsstand? I mean, you are more connected than ever before, but what's the advice that you would say if you want to be, seen and stocked is the right word? What's the best way to go about it?
If you're an independent publisher, if you're a small scale independent publisher, the best thing to do is to just email those stores, send them an Instagram DM, whatever sort of point of contact you have. Tell them a bit about your publication, share some pages, or mail them a whole issue. We definitely like to engage with the print product before we choose to bring something new in, just because you can see so much more about a publication when you actually hold it. Just ask. That's the thing. If you're publishing on a larger quantity, you have the option for distribution, and international distribution can be so helpful in accessing multiple stockists and retailers. But again, that's find distributors you think are interesting, or folks who distribute magazines that you think are at a similar level to you, and reach out, send an email and ask some questions. I think it is that thing of you don't know what you don't know, so ask.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that, because I've had editors, I've sometimes stalked editors at events. Hey, I've got this book. Oh, send us a PDF. No. Here's a book. It's in my bag. Here's the book. Take the book. Like, it's physical. It's different. Like, I've put my heart and soul in this because this is an extension of me. Here's the book. Take the book. I think, yeah, it sounds like exactly the same.
Well, and that heart and soul piece is so important. It was really important to me that these magazines get displayed with the same kind of care and attention that goes into making them, right? Like, I know firsthand how much time and energy and love goes into making a publication. I want to make sure that they are displayed with a similar amount of care, unlike going to your local convenience store, which happens to have magazines stacked on magazines, right? We want to make sure that they're cared for in the same way that the people who make them care for them.
With a limited time to read, what is your favorite magazine at the moment? What's your best new find, and what's your favorite magazine?
My favorite stayed the same for a while. My favorite is MacGuffin, which is published out of the Netherlands. Every issue looks at a different inanimate object, and any sort of magazine obsessive listening, I'm sure, will be familiar with MacGuffin. But it's so well researched. It's so well written. It's so well designed. It's such a joy to spend time with. And every single issue is a surprise. So because they take an inanimate object and look at it from a bunch of different directions, objects like the trousers, the ball, the letter, the bottle, random objects chosen intentionally, it's always a treat. I always learn so much. It piques a certain kind of curiosity. My most recent find, That's a fascinating question. Now, things come across my desk in the last little bit that I wasn't aware of yet and floored me. But I think the one that we're spending a lot of time talking about around the shop right now is a publication made here in Toronto called Bully. And Bully is a fashion title, a Black-led fashion title that's just shaken things up. They are publishing the kinds of stories and fashion editorials that don't really have a home in other publications in Canada. And that's been pretty exciting.
I can see it's got a very bold type for Bully on.
Yes, it does. Big. And it's a big magazine. They've just published their second issue recently, and it's a big magazine. It sits on your coffee table. It rivals the IDs and the Dazed.
I can see also stock Chutney. I found Chutney there. We got the same printers. I've got a copy when I meant to be printing my latest books. So I got a copy of Chutney, and I was in awe. I was like, oh, wow. There's something about traditional, I feel like the magazine designers are just made differently. There's the certain way, if you were to try to emulate it as a sort of standard graphic designer, and I'm like a non-linear, multifaceted creative, I just borrow and cross-pollinate. But I opened Chutney, I was like, oh, I wish I was as good as this, like in terms of editorial flow and stuff. Because with my books, I try to reimagine like how we can actually make a publication in a different way. No one says it has to be done in a certain stance, a certain way. And when I was working on my latest books, I was inspired by Kindling. I bought it for my kids, but I kept it for myself because I just wanted to amalgamate magazine elements into my books. Just have these things that are just, they surprise you in a way. And when I opened Chutney, I was like, oh my God, this is good. It's really good.
So Osmond started making Chutney here in Toronto. So I will hold Chutney as a Toronto Canadian made title, even though this issue was made in London. And Chutney it's incredible. This issue is so wonderful. So the first two issues only had a print run of about 250 copies. And this issue had 1,000 print run. It's no longer being risograph printed and hand bound. It's offset printed, larger scale, big swing for Osmond and for Chutney. Osmond's a self-taught editor and a self-taught designer. He's studying design now, but has been making Chutney as a non-editor, non-writer, non-designer for the last couple of years. And it's such an incredible title. It's so well done.
I was like, there was Iranian funk.
Yeah, yes. One of my favorite things about this issue of Chutney was because it used to be risograph printed, it had this imperfection to it. It had this handmade quality to it. And going to a sort of larger scale print run, Osmond found ways to keep that sort of hand-done nature to it. So you'll notice a lot of the stories are still only one or two colors. The paper is not white. There's all these little details. There's hand-done elements that keep it feeling really handmade and special.
We share the same printers. All of our titles are carbon neutral, offset, printed with green energy. So it's just, you want to also tick those boxes because that makes you feel even more happier about what you're producing in the world. So yeah, there was an article about Iranian funk and I'm like, my brain couldn't even comprehend like Iranian funk. This is amazing. And the chosen illustration was in there and it transcended me to a different place. It was just, I've just been on a print run for my own books and I was like, oh, this is amazing. I just like, I know when you're on that journey of constantly wanting to improve and cross-pollinate, I'm like, oh, maybe next time, what do I do? I feel magazines are so dynamic. I feel like I'm very much in the world of books, but the vast majority of books are very safe. Something is very tactile, very minimal. There's only a few things that really stick out that are more rebellious. But for the magazines, as you say, there's always another issue. If this doesn't work, we got to print another issue. There's a few more stories and stuff. Yeah, this has been fascinating. I love how you are connected to all of these people through, because such a big community. And I guess that can only take us to talk about RGD, the organization that you're current president of. And to those who don't live in Canada and never heard of RGD, what would you describe it to the non-Canadian internationals? What do you do?
So RGD is a professional association. So we give designers a certification, so an accreditation of sorts, but we're also just a really big community association. So we're nationwide across Canada. We're over 4,000 members now in Canada. And it's designers of all kinds. So everything from the designer working in the print shop through to your design educators working in sort of high-level academia to your world-class award-winning agencies and studios. And RGD's mandate is to build community and to advocate for a better design community and design industry across the country.
It's a fascinating organization because everything that I've heard, the pleasure to experience with RGD. Again, it's got soul. It's got so much soul that sometimes it feels it's missing from other organizations, let's say in England or other places. And I remember being at Design Thinkers waiting for the lift at the hotel. And there was this lady. I was like, hey, how are you doing? Have you got a busy day ahead? And she's like, yeah, I do. And so do you. Oh my God, it's Hillary. It was the first time I met Hillary. I was just thinking it's just a random person in a hotel. I didn't recognize her from my picture. And am I right that Hillary's been around with the organization for the last 25 years?
Yeah, this month, Hillary's celebrating 25 years with RGD.
And I think she's been an incredible force. Like, I mean, everyone I speak to that's connected to RGD has got so many really nice things to say about the whole organization. So if I'm a graphic designer in Canada, and I want to be certified, what would I get from RGD? Do I get more connections, or do I get more sort of help in hand in how to conduct my business? What are you guys doing?
All of the above. We published a professional handbook about design, which has all manner of templated contracts and agreements and invoicing structures and non-disclosures, all kinds of forms that you would need to run your own business. Virtual communities, so ways for people to connect based on their very specific sort of professional genre or identity. We do a ton of advocacy work in the accessibility space and publish an accessibility handbook. So accessibility is all about how designers can be more accessible, or what the legislation is, because accessibility is law in a lot of provinces in Canada now. The Design Thinkers Conference, which is what you've had the privilege of interacting with RGD, which happens in Vancouver, Toronto in November every year. And that's just such an incredible opportunity to connect with other designers, and then also connect to the global design community. I think that's the thing that conference has done so well. We bring together our Canadian community, but most of our speakers are coming from other parts of the world. So that keeps us connected. If you're a student, there's like awards programs and mentorship and piles of resources. We just had our AGM last weekend, and the sheer volume of projects that are on the go at any moment is mind-boggling.
How do you even digest it all? Because having spoken to you for the last 45 minutes, I am pretty sure that the magazines will be always, like, as long as you're alive. There'll be a magazine shop in Toronto, you'll be publishing magazines, and I feel like that path is linear. It's only going ahead, and I'm only going forward, but it's going to be in the ways of David Bowie. I don't know where I'm going, but it's not going to be boring. I think in your way, like, the magazines will be always the thing. But my question is about graphic designer as a position, as a job title, because since I started calling myself graphic designer, which was about 24 years ago, and I remember how proud I was, I'm still somewhere deep, I know that deep down I'm still a graphic designer with what I do, but my sort of professional world is so multifaceted. I do so many other things. And in that time, in the last 24 years, we got job titles that never even be thought of. Like, if I was to tell you that someone would be head of product, be like, that's a joke, right? Or you're going to be like head of experience. What were you telling me? Like, the job titles that even didn't exist 10 years ago now exist now. And sometimes what you would do as a graphic designer, it's so different, diluted. Where do you see future of graphic design and a sort of as a profession of a graphic designer?
I think you sort of hit the nail on the head when you said that even though your career is so multifaceted now, you work on so many different projects, you still think about yourself as a graphic designer. So I think sort of the fundamentals of graphic design are not changing anytime soon. We're just finding new and interesting ways to apply those theories and those fundamentals and those processes. So I don't think graphic design disappears in any way. I do think the job titles are ever expanding. You're right. UX, UI would have meant nothing to me 10 years ago, and it means a lot to me now. The idea of being a prompt engineer, which is something a lot of designers are dabbling in, those are all things that we're adding to the roster of design industry. I think the future of design, it looks a lot like the past. It just adopts new technologies, and we continue exploring and experimenting and adopting them. If you were to think pre-computer, there are a lot of jobs that don't exist anymore, but graphic design is still here. Even though typesetters are not doing the work that they used to do, we're still typesetting, just digitally.
When you think about it, the last 2 decades, when there was these bubbles of opinions like designers need to code. And now you look into the future of, like, for example, with AI, language is going to replace the code because the code is so ingrained in AI that it's the prompt. He said prompt engineers and that kind of stuff. Like, it's all changing. So what we thought it was like absolute master necessity, according to some, it's almost obsolete. That the idea that designers need to code, it was good to know, it's good to have. I know how to code, but I know how to fix a code. I'm not a coder, but it's like knowing about how connected we are through graphic design into so many different disciplines, how our place influences the world of business and economy, and how we generate revenue, and how people be successful. And I think, as we just agreed on, is the fact that what we create hasn't changed. Like, what was the principles of what we created are still very much same as 100 years ago to 200 years ago. And I think this is the magical part that I think we feared that graphic design is going to disappear, and you got graphic designers and visual designers and this and that. But going back to one of your former guests at Design Thinkers, Stefan Sagmeister, he still calls himself a graphic designer. A man who can call himself absolutely anything. I'm a graphic designer. And we feel in our insecurities like, I'm an art director, designer, illustrator, all of this stuff now. It's okay. Just can keep it easy for yourself.
It's funny. I've been thinking a lot about the intersection of sort of art and commerce and how design falls in that middle part of the Venn diagram. And I think what we learn as graphic designers, whether that's through formal education or experience working in this industry, what we learn is a process and a way of thinking about the world and a way of asking questions. We become almost obsessive about needing to know the whys and hows of whatever topic we are engaged with. And I think that's a skill set that is going to continue to be important in the way we create a visual world.
You said the right thing about asking questions, because sometimes we feel we know everything. We're like, oh no, I don't, I'm good to start. I'm good to make a start. Whereas I think it comes with age, because when you feel comfortable asking the extra question and the question afterwards and the question, and then you question the question and question the answer, you go, oh, now it makes sense. Because as a creative, when you get a brief from someone who hasn't really thought about it, who's got half of an idea, you take it as a face value. You take it as oh, okay, let's work with this, only to find out it was never going to work. And I've got 2 young children, and my boy, he's beautifully curious. He just asks he asks why 17 times. And you tell him why. And I'm thinking, this could be annoying to someone, but to me, it's like he's actually unlocking my sort of new ways of thinking. Of course, I can describe that answer 10 times differently. I can tell him this time, because he's going to ask, he's going to keep asking, because some of it might be going over his head because he's still very little. But I think it's a superpower to actually go into a situation and say, you know what, I'm going to ask you loads of questions, and I'll still make you feel comfortable, and we're going to get really good stuff out of it. I think this is our superpower. So
I think, to borrow from Brian Collins a little bit, our superpower is being able to imagine a future, right? We actually invent the future when we are putting a design project together. We're inventing a brand identity. Sometimes we're literally inventing the look and feel of a product that doesn't exist yet, physical product or digital product. And so that ability to make something from nothing, and to make something for nothing that goes out into society, not as art, but as part of our sort of societal existence, is meant to be used, right? Something that's meant to be engaged with and used, not just looked at.
That's a very good segue. So we're going to take the Brian Collins, we imagine the future, and you reason to start your shop, which is, I wish it existed. What is your next thing? What if you could make anything happen, future thing that you wish existed that doesn't exist right now, what would that be?
Here in Canada, we don't have a ton of support for independent magazine publishers to get started. And it's something that I really want to see. So the idea of a magazine incubator, I want to incubate and mentor and support startup publishing projects. I want to give platforms to stories that aren't being told in our commercial media. And I want to give money to writers and photographers and illustrators who are doing the work to platform those stories. That's my dream right now. And it'll take me some time to figure out how to get there. But I am practicing saying it out loud, because that is the first step towards imagining a future of any kind.
We all have these ideas that we want to make, and sometimes we find so many reasons for our little insecurities going, or maybe not just yet, or maybe in the future, maybe this. And I think it's the magical thing, because when you're young, you feel really scared or I don't have the right funds, and you're distracted. When you get older, you feel yourself, you haven't got time, but actually everything can be done. So I do love your idea of a magazine incubator, because I think be magazines are always in your world, and I really like that, because being obsessive about that thing, it sometimes takes time for us to find it. But yeah, I can't wait to visit your store in the future and not exceed my baggage allowance on the way back to London. Yeah, no, everything you described sounds absolutely perfect. So apart from the magazine incubator, you still working on the magazine? You say just send the magazine to print?
I did. Last week we sent the 4th issue of Serviette to print, which, yes, you can see behind me, a little sneak preview.
Sort of as a sort of closing point, with the world of editorial, you can, because it's so interchangeable, as you said, that you can borrow a trend or you can surf a trend as it comes. Is it something that visually you wish to do or wish to add an extra element? Because we've had augmented reality, we had all of these things, they come and go, but is there something content-wise, style-wise, finishing-wise that you would like to achieve with one of your magazines?
I don't think so. I mean, I feel like every magazine is different, and the magic of making magazines is responding to the content that's in front of you. And there are often stories that I wouldn't have encountered otherwise, or I wouldn't have sought out. And for me, the best part about making magazines is the collaboration with other creatives. So with photographers and illustrators and type designers, that's just the best part. That's the best part, and the part I wouldn't give up for anything. And to overcomplicate that process with more technology, it's not for me. There's people that do it so incredibly well, but it's not my bag. And that's okay. It doesn't need to be.
Staying true to yourself. I love it. Thank you so much for your time. I absolutely geeked out on this conversation. So yeah, thank you so much for what you're doing, because it's incredible. And as I said, next time I'm in town, I'll be in the store.
Yeah, come visit us. But also, thanks for having me and for doing what you do, because it's also really valuable.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of Creativity for Sale podcast. The show was produced and presented by me, Radim Marnich. Editing and audio production was masterfully done by Neil Mackay from 7 Million Bikes Podcasts. Theme music was written and produced by Robert Summerfield. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support the podcast, please subscribe and leave a rating or review. To get your own action plan on how to start and grow a life-changing creative business, you can get a copy of Creativity for Sale book via the links in show notes. As always, keep those creative fires burning, and until next time, I'm Radim Marnich, your guide through this exploration of passion, creativity, innovation, and the boundless potential within us all.